Hello everyone, Infinity Gamer here, and I'm going to do a faction focus on my favourite faction of them all, O12. Now I'm going to break this down into three parts. First I'm going to cover the history and the lore of O12 and how they fit in the Infinity story. Then I'm going to talk about how they were launched as part of Corvus Belli's models strategy, and then I'm going to look at the models, the unit profiles and the roles they would play in a list. So feel free to skip ahead if you don't fancy any of those. There's something in here for everyone, but it's going to be a good overview of the O12 faction for CodeOne. So let's begin with history and lore. Rising from the ashes of the United Nations, the O12 is the new policing power of the human sphere. And obviously that voice is not sustainable for very long, and it's also fairly rubbish. So let's go into the history of O12. Basically, the United Nations crumbled as most of the main powers who were controlling it and funding it and keeping it going disappeared, vanished, went broke, or had horrific ends. So as humans reached the stars with varying degrees of success, the power shifted. The great hyperpowers of old faded. Europe, for example, went into decline. The US pretty much went broke funding deep space exploration. And out of the powers that were left, that vacuum was filled with new entities. A human sphere emerged with a collection of the New World Order. So Pan-Oceania, for example, with New Zealand and Australia, they're the most powerful currently, with the most planets, the biggest economy, the biggest tech. They defend Western traditions and values, and they are very much the biggest power in the new human sphere. China, Japan, South Korea formed Eugene, the second biggest power. They've got old traditions, but emerging tech, and they seek to usurp Pano to refocus humanity away from profits. They are very much the yin and the yang. Those two are bitter rivals of old and constantly at each other, which is fun. Ariadne, they were founded by the first humans to venture through a wormhole on a colony ship. Now, after that ship was trapped due to the wormhole collapse, they've basically become tough survivors on the rugged edge of space. These guys felt abandoned, kind of rediscovered or refound themselves and became part of the human sphere, and I think feel slightly bitter at the fact that their endeavours paved the way for a lot of the world that exists today, but they obviously had to struggle and survive, and while others have risen and found power and found prosperity, those guys have become hardy, rugged pioneers, really. Haq Islam, which is another one of the factions, stands for True Islam. They're a humanist power and views humans as God's greatest work. Always room for self-reflection, and they're in control of the most powerful and essential drug to the human sphere called silk. They are experts in biomedical science, a really powerful race, really cool. Nomads, disenfranchised with society and the Aleph overarching AI that controls the human sphere. They travel through the system's trading. They shun mainstream society and journey on 3 ships, with each specialising in its own niche. Toha, they were not part of the original human race, but they have found an ally in the human sphere in their long-running battle against the combined army. But are all as they seem? Are they really on the side of the humans and against the combined army? Talking of which, the combined army. Many alien races have united against this new human threat. Underneath an EI, which is an evolved intelligence, which is ancient and supreme. Advanced alien technology is now trained firmly on humans. Aleph is the unique artificial intelligence controlling the data networks and technological systems of the entire human sphere. Aleph is humanity's greatest ally, and without it, intergalactic commerce, geopolitical entities, and travel itself would fall apart almost instantly. But who can know what Aleph really thinks? The representatives will tell you that for the AI, the sphere is home and its responsibility. But with an all-powerful artificial intelligence, who can know what machinations are at play? So that's kind of the Infinity world as it stands. So where does O12 fit? So with previously powerful nations in decline, a new body was needed to help manage these new entities. With the help of the ultra-powerful AI, Aleph, O12 rules with ultimate power. So the arrival of the combined army has forced the powers of the human sphere to seek a fragile alliance with each other. And that is held together by O12. Now this does not mean that battle is over between each of those hyperpowers. Small tactical skirmishes, covert attacks and clandestine missions are rife, as the ongoing struggle for ultimate power rages in the shadows. So, while everyone is focused on keeping Combined Army from destroying everything human, within that, humans are typically humans and fighting in amongst each other for power, resources, and wealth. O12 has been around since the beginning of the human sphere and fights to maintain peace between the hyperpowers. Based on Concilium Prima, which is its own planetary system, O12 enforces law and collaboration. So, O12 is responsible for maintaining the Aleph AI, which manages the human sphere, and also the Circulars, which are wormhole jumping spaceships, which are the core infrastructure to the human sphere. They also coordinate efforts against the Combined Army. But they're not politicians, well, they're not merely politicians and bureaucrats. They're the long arm of the law, they're the judge, jury, and executioner, and they rule with an iron fist. Broken down into 12 bureaus, each is responsible for its own area under the direction of the Oberhaus. The Oberhaus is the beating heart of the establishment, and within its court, international laws and treaties are passed. The Conclave accepts or rejects application for new states to become a member of the O12 body, gain its protection, but also come under its rule. The Commission within the Oberhaus investigates issues across the human sphere and reports back so the 12 bureaus can act accordingly. The 12 bureaus are Bureau Aegis, it's the Justice Division. Within this bureau, there are two subdivisions. There's Section Statera, which are the lawyers and the civil servants, so they enforce the law through the legal letter. Then there's Sword 4, which is Section Sparta, and that's when scenarios get escalated and force is required. So that's broken down into traditional policing, tactical law enforcement, and there's also a naval element too. This policing might include defense against Combined Army, beating down private corporate armies, tackling mercenary groups, and anything that disrupts the peace. There's then Bureau Toth, which are the Aleph supervisors, Bureau Tiandi, Stellar Studies, Bureau Noir, which are the Secret Service. These guys are dark, secret, and mysterious. And so while all other bureaus keep separate to each other, only Noir knows everything that's going on. It's a case of who polices the policeman, and Bureau Noir is very much in charge of making sure everyone stays in line. There's Bureau Ganesh, that's economy. Bureau Gaia, that's planetary terraforming, so that's key for colonizing other planets, so pretty handy. Bureau Lakshmi, that's for health. Bureau Concilium, that's the Concilium government. Bureau Agni, energy. Bureau Trimurti, internal affairs. Bureau Athena is in charge of culture, human rights, and religion. And Bureau Hermes is in charge of commerce management. So those are 12 bureaus that make up O12. O12 is politically neutral, and because it's not formed from the people it controls, unlike the United Nations of old, it can exact justice across all the human sphere without prejudice. O12 has its own powerful star system, like the powers of Pano, Yujing, and the others, so it's not just a government entity, it is its own hyperpower that has just been given charge of all of the other hyperpowers and keeping them in line as much as it can do. So that's it in terms of the lore. As mentioned, O12 has been mentioned for a long time in books and in the history. It has been a part of the storyline, but it's never actually featured until recently. So let's step into that, which is the launch for O12 and how that's handled in amongst all the other miniatures. So O12 is actually the newest faction to have a product range in Corvus Belli's Infinity range. It was launched with Operation Wildfire to start with, alongside Combined Army Shazvasti models, and was expanded with Beyond Operation Wildfire. Most of the above models that you'll find in Operation Wildfire and Beyond Operation Wildfire are compatible with CodeOne, but they also offered a couple of special miniatures alongside that. So Valkyrie, for example, was a pre-order, which is also from the Aristea, I think, product line. That's not yet CodeOne compatible. Team Sirius is not yet CodeOne compatible, but you might see that floating around in amongst the O12 stuff. Same with the Alpha, also not yet CodeOne compatible. But O12 was one of the 4 founding factions for CodeOne. Due to Infinity's balance, O12, despite being the newest, is not better than any other faction. That's one of the great things about Infinity, is that everything is so well balanced that you can pick pretty much any army, whether it's old or new, and it still be really competitive. You won't find a dominant faction in Infinity, only dominant players. So O12 as an army is characterized as having some heavy hitting and tactical deployment models, It doesn't feature a lot of the complexity other lists have, making it perfect for beginners and those looking to just shoot stuff off the table. I do recommend O12 as a beginner army because not only are the models fairly easy to understand, you can see which ones are heavy hitters because of how they look, but also because the rules are not so complex and the models are fairly straightforward. So that transitions us nicely into models and roles. So I'm only going to focus on the CodeOne options at this stage, so this will be all of the units that are viable for a game of CodeOne. You can find them in the Army Builder. I'll pop a link just above to my video that explains how to use the Army Builder, and it uses O12 as a demo, so you can very easily see how to use the Army Builder in the context of O12. So let's start with CASANOVA. So there's no model available for this yet. Here's a new release that came out with CodeOne. Typically he'll cost you 0 SWC and 3 points, so it's relatively expensive, and he fills the light infantry slot. He's got an AVA of 1, so you'd only be able to throw one of him in your list, which is fine, but he's got excellent close combat traits. Now, remember that with values higher than 20 on a model's data sheet, so because 20 is the maximum you can get on a D20 dice, every result of 20 and above is a crit, pretty much. So when you include modifiers. On a normal roll, basically any result will be a success because you physically cannot roll higher than 20. And even with modifiers, it will be very difficult. So strangely, the number above 20 in someone's stats also gives them a free boost of the difference on other rolls. So for example, if CASANOVA rolls a 7, you would add 1 automatically because he's got a CC 21. So his 7 would become an 8, just by default. It also means that he will achieve a crit if he rolls a 19, because a 19 plus 1 becomes a 20. So it is a little bit confusing, and I apologise for starting with one of the more complicated models for O12, but I figure if I get the complicated ones out of the way, then we can get onto the more standard ones. So his BTS is high, so that's his biotechnical shield, and that's protection against weapons like nanopulsers. So basically any weapon that makes you take a BTS save rather than an arm save, you'll be using this BTS value, so it's good that his is pretty high. He's got martial arts level 3, which makes him a bit even more of a beast in CC because he gets a boost to his attacks. Obviously check out martial arts level 3 if you are thinking about taking this model, but it just basically means that it's going to be even easier for you to achieve crits. He's got forward deployment 8 inches, which means he can be deployed outside of your deployment zone, but within 8 of its edge. So great for getting him up the table slightly early, and maybe towards the threat range. He's got mimetism -6, which means anything shooting at him will experience a -6 modifier before range and cover and all that sort of stuff have been applied. So that makes him pretty survivable. He could be out in the open with no cover at all, and someone will still have a -6 modifier to their shot. He's got dodge +3, which means that there's even more chance of his dodge roll going off. And he's got the special operative keyword, which means that in many missions, he can do special things to help you complete the objective, like push buttons and do that sort of thing. He only comes with one profile, which is the submachine gun, nanopulsar pistol, and monofilament CC. The submachine gun is great at short range. You get a +3 to your shooting if you're within 8 inches, but you do lose effectiveness beyond 16, so you need to make sure you're in close. But the B3 and the AP ammo are really good. The AP ammo reduces your target's arm by half, so down to a minimum of 1. So that's pretty handy for making sure it goes through. The nanopulsar is a great weapon. You use the small teardrop template, so it auto hits, which is good. It's also tricky to dodge. I think it imposes a -3 to a dodge typically, and can obviously hit more than one model, so it's good if you get into the thick of it. The user has to save against their BTS, not their arm. So we were talking about that. So great if you manage to find a mismatch with an opponent that doesn't really have a BTS save. The monofilament CC is a close range weapon and would be the one that you would want to use. Damage 12. They save against their arm, but if they fail, they go straight to a dead state. So it does not matter how many wounds that model has. If they fail a single save, they're dead. And by dead, that's not unconscious. That is, remove that model from the table. Bye-bye, gonzo, see you no more. So just let that sink in, but you know, if you can get this guy into close combat with something big, you could potentially change the game. CYBERGHOSTS. Quantronic Intervention Unit, what a name. So SWC 0.5 and cost 2, light infantry, so a little bit cheaper than CASANOVA. AVA2, so you can put 2 in your list if you want to. There's only 1 profile at present, and there's no model available as of yet. They've got kind of average ballistic skill, but decent in close combat. They've got a good whip, which is handy for their hacking, which I'll explain in a little bit. And they've also got a strong BTS save. The profile is a pistol, combi rifle, and para-CC weapon -3. I'll explain that just after I've gone through hacking, but that's pretty cool. Hacking device. So you can access the 2 hacking programs, which are Carbonite and Spotlight, as a hacker, which means he can also sometimes press buttons in missions. So you'll notice in some missions it says that hackers, doctors, paramedics, and special operatives can do special stuff. Just worth noting if you're going to take the hacker that he could potentially be doing stuff for you. The combi rifle with B3 is pretty standard, gives you +3 boost to your ballistic skill up to 16 inches, so that's pretty good, but you've got to factor in that you've got to be fairly close. You know, don't put him as a ARO piece with a long corridor, because he's just not going to work mostly. Combi rifle does go straight to -3 outside of 16, so you've really got to watch your distances with this. Make sure you deploy them properly if you're going to use it. Pistol is burst 1 NCC, damage 11. You might use this situationally, but it's going to be rare because with the para-CC weapon, you want to use that if you can. So if you do get into close combat, technically it has no damage. It's non-lethal technically. It uses para ammo. So the save is not against armor because there's not any damage technically going through. And it's a save against the model's pH, but it suffers a -6 to that. So again, a good matchup here is finding a model that's got relatively low pH and then dealing a -6 modifier to that, which is really cool. It's also -3 for your opponent to hit back in CC. It is a non-lethal weapon and it immobilizes the target if they fail their save. So it's really good situationally. So basically, if you put this up against a really big unit with lots of wounds, high armor, and good BTS save, then if your wound goes through, you're putting it into an immobilized state, which means that it still generates an order. It can still do an ARO, but it's limited in its ARO so that it can only dodge depending on which immobilized state it goes into. And so it basically is useless. To all intents and purposes, apart from generating an order, it is completely useless. So you could fully incapacitate as a huge model that is ruining you with 1 lucky hit, with 1 hit that goes through. So just consider that as a way to deal with something that's massive and chonky on the table. For hacking, Carbonite is damage 13 for the purposes of saves, but doesn't actually damage the target. It's burst 2, so you can technically split fire. You do hacking programs on your whip, so the fact that the CyberGhost has got a fairly good whip is actually really good. You can target tags, heavy infantry, remotes, and other hackers. It's a short skill attack and puts the target in an immobilized B state. So that means, like your para ammo, any failed save means the target becomes immobilized, regardless of how strong that model is. So the range of the attack is the hacker's hacking area. Spotlight is your other option, and it places the target in a targeted state. And targeted state means that any BS attacks on that unit, hacks and comms attacks, get a +3 modifier on targets in this state. So a targeted unit must apply -3 to their whip to perform a reset roll to try and cancel the hack. AROs and equipment still work. So yeah, it can be cancelled in the same way as Immobilized B, which is handy to know. And Immobilized B, which is what happens with Carbonite, which is the other program, you cannot declare any skills or AROs except reset, applying a -3 mod. So again, you continue to provide orders, can be cancelled by succeeding a reset roll, applying a -3 mod to your whip, but an engineer or a doctor, depending on what the unit is, can also heal you out of an immobilized state. Immobilized B and Immobilized A are pretty similar, apart from the fact that obviously a dodge with a -6 mod is harder to get out of than a reset with a -3 mod. So Immobilized A is marginally better. CyberGhosts, will I use them? Probably. There's other hackers out there that I would probably end up taking instead of a CyberGhost, but they look pretty cool, and if I could also get this CyberGhost into CC, then it's obviously going to wreck shop potentially, so very tempting, but I think there's other models I would probably take if I wanted something to go in and destroy a big unit up close and personally. Ensign Catherine Cho, Psy unit. So she runs SWC cost of 0 and a points cost of 1 and fills the light infantry slot. Again, there's no model yet, but we did actually get a tease of her model in the Defiance Kickstarter that Corvus Belli ran last year. She comes in 2 profiles. One is a lieutenant, so she can be your leader, and obviously as a lieutenant she would generate an extra special lieutenant order token, which can only be used on her. Stats wise, she's good and a solid option. Her ADA is 1, so you can only grab 1 and put that in your list. She's got a combi rifle, nanopulsar, pistol and CC weapon. We've covered combi rifle and nanopulsar earlier, and the pistol and the CC weapon are fairly basic, so there's nothing hugely special about this profile. Katherine's not exceptional, but she's a good option for a lieutenant that won't generate too much heat and can potentially still grab an objective. I'd probably run her as, if there was a scenario where I wanted my lieutenant to just sit in the corner and not really generate any attention, but I think it's fairly obvious that if you're taking Katherine Cho, you're probably taking her as a lieutenant, so she'll probably attract some attention anyway. So at the moment I don't really see her being included in many lists, at least not for me, but I'm happy to be proven wrong. Kappa unit. So these guys are SWC 0 to 1.5 and costing 1 or 2 points, so really light on the points, and they are a light infantry option. They're hugely versatile, so definitely worth considering, even though there's nothing really special about them. They're vulnerable to BTS attacks because they don't have a BTS save, so just try and avoid any mismatches of someone who's hitting you with a nanopulsar, for example, because that makes you take on your BTS. These guys are O12's core trooper. They're kind of a paramilitary unit, so still pretty specialist by comparison to other armies' mainline troopers. And you might find a couple of your opponents complaining that our basic trooper is better than their basic trooper, but that's fine. They've also probably got stuff that we don't have. Everything's fairly balanced. They don't have bad ballistic skill, but it's also not exceptional. You know, 12 is not the worst on the planet. They're a solid option. An AVA of T means total, so you can run as many Kappas as you like, so long as you stay within the standard list limits of not exceeding, 10 models in a group and stuff like that. So you could run an entirely O12 Kappa list if you really fancied it. I don't know if you should, but you could. They have an LT option, lieutenant option, so yeah, you absolutely could have every single model being a Kappa if you fancied it. The first profile that we've got on offer is your really basic Kappa. It's no frills, but it kind of gets the job done with a combi rifle. Next, there's a paramedic Kappa with a medikit. These are good for healing other troops if they take wounds, or you can revive an unconscious trooper. Potentially a good option, might not be my first pick as for a paramedic, but it's in there if you fancy it. There's also the Hacker Kappa, which is very similar. Obviously, hacking's very similar the world over, so we've already gone through that with the CyberGhost, in which case it's the same. They carry an SMG with the Hacker, which we've already covered with CASANOVA. So nothing new here, but obviously is an option for a cheaper Hacker. I personally don't think I'll be taking Hacker Kappas, because with hacks going off, I think it's your whip, I want to be taking a model that's got a higher whip just to increase the chance of that hack attack going off. A whip of 13 for the Kappa is not terrible, but everything makes a difference really. The lieutenant has the same weapons profile as the no frills Kappa, but obviously gets that extra lieutenant order. You can only have 1 lieutenant in your list, and in most cases it's going to be secret from your opponent, so that would be the advantage of running an all Kappa list, is that it would be very difficult to tell which one was actually your lieutenant. There's a missile launcher Kappa. So missile launchers work best at ranges over 8 inches, with the best being 24 inches to 40. So that's a lot of the field, and it's good as a backfield option covering your opponent's deployment area, so just bear that in mind. They're explosive, so they use the blast template, which can be great if you find a blob of troops. They also have AP ammo, so it halves the armor save of the target. It's also explosive, so that means that if a hit goes through, your target has to make 3 saving rolls, which could be quite painful. I might be taking missile launcher Kappas, because with their ballistic skill of 12 and with that sort of range, it could actually be a good option for just keeping out in the open as an ARO piece. Again, not many points, so don't worry about losing it too much, but then making your opponent think twice about taking a explosive blast to a trooper that he's just moving. So I reckon I might be taking a missile launcher Kappa. There's then an HMG Kappa, which is good at range with a +3 as soon as you get to kind of 16 inches to 32, and again on a ballistic skill 12, that's actually pretty fair. Damage 15 from the HMG and burst 4, so lays down a powerful bunch of rounds. I might be taking an HMG Kappa as well, but I think I've got another alternative to that later in the list, if for the same sorts of points. There's then the multi-sniper Kappa. Multi-sniper has a broad usable range, it's very versatile, so from 16 inches to 48 it gets +3, so that's really good as just like a ARO piece and area denial really. That's damage 15 if it goes through, that's going to be pretty hard to save against. The multi-sniper also has different modes to choose from depending on the in-game situation. So burst is B2 using AP ammo, which halves the target's arm. The anti-material is burst 1 but uses double action ammo, which means each successful hit requires 2 saving throws, and failing 1 allows the damage to go through. So again, it's good to have that option, I find. The fact that you can choose 2 different profiles means that situationally you can decide what you're doing. Multi-sniper Kappa is a possibility for one of my lists actually. LYNX. SWC 1.5 and costs 2.5 to 3, so we're back at the expensive end of the scale for O12, but you'll see why shortly. This one fills the light infantry slot, has an AVA of 2. There's no model available for it yet, but again, like with Catherine Cho, we kind of got teased with the Defiance Kickstarter what a LYNX might look like, so we could probably expect to see that within the next 12 months or so. And then it's one of the more complex profiles to use well. There's 2 profiles available. It's good at CC in close combat with 15 and a decent ballistic skill at 13, but where this thing really stands out is it's a sneak attack specialist. So it's camouflage, which means it can deploy as a camo token instead of having the model out. And it can return to a camoed state if it comes out of camo using a long skill. Camo markers need to be discovered by an enemy trooper to be attacked typically. The mimetism -6 also applies to discover rolls as well as being shot at. So if an enemy trooper is trying to discover you, it has to apply -6 to its discover roll, and then if you're successfully discovered, any shots going onto you also suffer -6. So this is actually going to be a pretty hard unit to remove from the table if used correctly. If it does attract an ARO, then you can only really attract a discover, a dodge, a delay, or a reset. So you're also forcing your opponents into making bad decisions because they've got to choose from one of those, none of which would typically remove the model from the table. So it's good for making your opponent make the difficult decisions. Surprise attack -3 only applies when you're coming out of marker state and making a BSCC or hack attack. So let's say you move up as a camo marker towards a target. That's your first short skill. They declare an ARO, which can be whatever, it doesn't matter for the purpose of this, but it will be a shoot, and then you decide to shoot that target. Your surprise attack will be a shot at that person, at that model, and they will suffer a -3 modifier for shooting you back or doing whatever they do back. So surprise attack could be good. Now don't forget that's already on top of a -6 mimetism, so it's pretty brutal. You could potentially really shift the balance of the right kind of conflict with that if you use it properly. Profiles for this model include marksman rifle, multi-sniper, both come with anti-personnel mines. The multi-sniper we've covered with the Kappa, but factor in the better ballistic skill of the LYNX, so it could be a more effective weapon in the hands of this model. The marksman rifle is kind of a watered down version of the sniper with damage 13. It's good between 8 inches and 24 inches and it's B3. The anti-personnel mines are kind of special, but in essence you basically get 3 to deploy through the game. You spend a deploy skill to drop a camo marker, which represents that mine, so it still needs to be discovered and stuff like that if they want to try and shoot it off the table. If it does get successfully discovered, then you replace it with a mine token. It gets mimetism -3 for discover rolls and things like that, so that could be pretty hard to discover as well, and then uses a small teardrop template when triggered, hitting the model that triggered it. So yeah, that could be pretty handy. I think there's actually a different model I would use if I wanted a camoed mine layer, but I'll tell you about that one later. But it's potentially a good option. So it's a good unit for a sneak attack, but it could lose effectiveness if not played properly, and with the points you're spending on this model, you really do want to play it properly. PSI-COPS, SWC 0 to 0.5, costing you 1.5 to 2, depending on which you choose, and it's a light infantry option. Again, there's no model for this one yet. This was also a new model that was launched with CodeOne for O12, so we don't know a lot about it. You could have 2 of these in your list if you fancied it. and there are 3 profiles available for you to choose from. The stats are pretty good, better than average ballistic skill, good CC and resilient to BTS attacks. The mimetism -3 is obviously very handy for survivability, and it gets +1 burst on the nanopulsar, so it could be even more deadly if you manage to get it in close and to use that nanopulsar. It's got the specialist operative, so that is handy because, again, if you read a lot of mission types, this means that this model could potentially go and push buttons and do stuff for you. And at 1.5 to 2 points, you don't really worry too much about losing these. There are definitely worse models you could be throwing into the firing line. Basically, it has a weapon to deal with most situations because it's got the combi rifle nanopulsar, so it could be good up close. The heavy pistol is also pretty handy and a close combat weapon. It's a pretty good option. The marksman, we've covered the main weapon before, so it's a good option, but combine that with the MSV1 that it has. Now, MSV1 drops mimetism mods by 3, so mimetism -3, for example, would now be 0. And mimetism -6 would become mimetism -3 for any attack the PSI-COP makes on that target. So you definitely want to try and get this going towards something that's got mimetism in place, just to even the balance a little bit. Hacker, very similar to the CyberGhost in how that works. If I wanted a hacker and I was choosing between the CyberGhost and the PSI-COP, I probably would go with the PSI-COP, as they're about the same cost, I think. But again, don't quote me on that in the future because chances are I'll contradict myself. They're both pretty good options actually as hackers, I think. And there's actually something else I'll probably be using as my main hacker later on in the list. Specialized support LAMBDA, that will cost you SWC 0 and 1.5 points and is light infantry. You can take 2 of them, and there's 2 profiles available. There's no model available yet. This is an excellent support unit and might end up featuring quite heavily in some lists, it depends. So both profiles that it has are very fixy. You know, there's an engineer, which is good if the models in your list have structure rather than wounds, and there's also a doctor, which is good if most of your models have wounds rather than structures. So which one you choose will probably actually be dictated by the rest of your list more than anything. Both have the same weapons profile, so are pretty standard. It's a really good low-cost support unit to potentially keep your bigger pivotal units in the game. I wouldn't be surprised if at some stage I'm running a specialist support LAMBDA hanging out near a gamma, so that if my gamma starts to take wounds, this thing can go and heal it and keep it alive for a bit longer. So something I've learned recently, and thank you very much Chris Ford and Bryn and a whole bunch of other people from the New Zealand group for Infinity for explaining this to me, is that a doctor and an engineer in your list is actually allowed to add up to 2 Yudbots to their profile, and obviously pay the cost for the Yudbots, and they don't count as extra slots in your list. So you could take a LAMBDA doctor or LAMBDA engineer if you really wanted to, add 2 Yudbots to that profile, and then use those Yudbots to also ferry around the board, healing things as well. And I think for a low-cost option, this would actually be really viable for the LAMBDA engineer or the LAMBDA doctor. So that's what I'm maybe thinking, is to run this with a couple of Yudbots so that it's easier for the LAMBDA to stay away from trouble and then use the peripheral Yudbots to go and run away and go and heal stuff. So interesting strategy. Let me know if you give it a go and see if it works. Crushers, Special Naval Demolition Team. So they've got an SWC of 0 in all their profiles, and they cost between 2 and 3 points. They're medium infantry, so we're stepping up a little bit now. AVA 2, so you could take 2 if you fancied it. There's 3 profiles available. They all come with mimetism -3 as standard, and also the special operative keywords, so it can help you complete missions, and that's worth bearing in mind. Got Armor 2, BTS 3, so they stand a decent chance of taking a hit and maybe making a save. These guys might be good to put in the thick of battle. The SMG and the multi-sniper profiles both get you forward deployment 8 inches, so that basically means that they can start the game 8 inches outside of your deployment zone. So that's a solid option for this unit actually, because you might be pushing them forward to, you know, push buttons and do antenna stuff. So yep, could be good. The third option is a parachutist, which means it starts off the table and is secret. So in theory, your enemy doesn't know it's coming. Remember that while they're off the table though, they don't add orders to your order pool. Parachutists come in from the table edge, so they can, so long as you're not trying to do this in your enemy's deployment zone, unless the mission states that you can, then you can come in from any table edge you like. So that could be handy for, again, certain missions like quadrant control. It could be good for anything we need to get behind enemy lines pretty much, and then start to do some fun stuff. So that's good. So, but combat jump gives you a couple of other options. So combat jump basically enables you to drop anywhere on the board if it passes a PH roll. Strategy wise, the crushers could be a little bit tricky, because one thing you really want with those hidden deployment models is to confuse your opponents quite a bit. So the good thing we have with O12 is that there are so many models that come in from hidden deployment that just because you're missing, you're only giving them 9 models to see in your courtesy list, so they kind of know that one model is probably going to come in at some stage. The range of models we have means that he doesn't know if that's going to be a Crusher, a Delta, it could be a QUERVO GOLDSTEIN, so there's a couple of things that it could be, and so just the question mark around which model it is will definitely be helpful. I like the Crushers, and I might start one on the table, you know, deployed that 8 inches extra, and then push it towards a tricky objective. I'd probably run the SMG one, but I might also potentially go with a very heavy combat jump AD drop list, where this features as one of the options. So yeah, I think I'm going to be taking Crushers in some circumstances. For a mission like Firefight, for example, where specialist operatives can come in, are really valuable, a Crusher would be a good option. So in Firefight, expect to come up against a Crusher potentially. QUERVO GOLDSTEIN, so let's keep on the theory of things that drop in from the sky. He's got SWC of 0 and costs 3 to 3.5, so it's a little bit heavier on the costs perspective. He's also medium infantry. AVA of 1, so you can only take one of him in your list. He comes with 2 profiles, with the only main difference being the main armament between the 2 of them. He's a Basalisk level Delta, so he's the elite of the elites. I think he's a former mercenary who's then turned enforcer, but don't quote me on that. I think I heard that somewhere and liked it, so all made it up. They have the combat jump and parachutist keywords and martial arts level 4. Martial arts level 4 is pretty cool. We've covered parachutists with the Crusher, so they've got that option to walk in from the table edge with no rolls or anything, so that's a very safe way to get as close to your enemy's area as possible. But combat jump gives you a couple of other options. So combat jump basically enables you to drop anywhere on the board if it passes a PH roll, which is good because QUERVO's actually got a decent PH, so might actually succeed that. But it's also severely risky because if you fail that, you actually go back to your deployment zone and you've got to start touching the edge of the table in your deployment zone. So it could be risky. It is a bit of a risk actually. But he has the choice. He can either combat jump or parachute walking from the table edge. And he's got martial arts level 4, which gives +3 to all of his attack modifier. So it gives a +3 modifier to his attacks and a -3 modifier to his opponent, and gives a plus to damage modifier as well. So yeah, in terms of his weapon profiles, both have advantages. The SMG is obviously good for short range, and it's B3, so good for split firing at different directions. It's also AP ammo, so halves the target's arm save. So that could be good if you do come in from the table edge near some enemies and you just want to shoot them from close range. There's also a boarding shotgun, which has 2 modes, blast and hit. Both are B2 and damage 14, but blast uses a small teardrop, so it could hit quite a few, and it obviously auto hits because it's using a template, so that's good. And hit mode uses AP ammo and can go for a slightly longer range. It's best at up to 8 inches, but could be usable up to 24 if the situation needed you to. So boarding shotgun could be good because if you don't know what you're walking into the table to face, at least you've got the choice if things go terribly wrong. The monofilament CC weapon has already been covered, but it is lethal if you can get into contact and use it. You know, you're taking things straight to a dead state, which is deadly. QUERVO could work well as like a hunter, going after the enemy lieutenant or going for a tag or something big that's being a pain, maybe something that's on a rooftop potentially. So yeah, good option here. He is on the pricey side though, so you do want to make sure that you recoup the points by not deploying him so poorly that he gets taken off before he's actually managed to do anything. So yeah, he's a risky one, because if he's done well, he could be potentially deadly, but if not, then you've burned a whole lot of points. Delta. SWC will cost you between 0 and 1.5 depending on the profile you choose, and will cost you 2 to 3 points, again depending on the profile. He's medium infantry. AVA of 4, so you could drop a few if you wanted. I don't know that you will, but it could be quite cool. 6 profiles, so lots of options to choose from. Delta's a very easy model to include in any list. O12 Special Commandos, the Elite Assault Troopers. Psychologically, they're thrill seekers and live for the adrenaline of a high-risk mission. They have the combat jump and parachutist keyword, so the same as QUERVO, which we've covered before. So you've got options here. They have a role for every situation. So they've got a standard version which just has a boarding shotgun, which is the same as QUERVO. So again, if you're just going to use QUERVO to potentially drop in and hit something with basically glass cannon, hit something with a boarding shotgun but potentially die, then use a Delta instead because it's cheaper. There's also a special operative version, which could be good more strategically for going in and pushing buttons and completing objective. That one comes with a combi rifle and a light riot stopper. The light riot stopper is pretty cool. It's a small template, uses para ammo, which is the paralysis ammo, I think. So that puts a unit into an immobilized A state if failed, and saves are on a pH -6. So this is great for going up against big models like tags and heavy infantry. So I like the idea of the Delta Special Operative because situationally you can either use them to try and go for a mission objective, or you can use them to take out a big model that's maybe sitting on an objective. So the versatility of that role is pretty awesome. So yeah, I like the Special Operative Delta. There's also a Delta Doctor with boarding shotgun and a medikit. So that's potentially good for dropping near an unconscious unit and fixing it, but I always feel that that's slightly expensive. So I'm actually moving away from using that. But don't forget, Doctors can also be used like Special Operatives. So yeah, that's again good, potentially good. Yeah, I'm falling out of love with the Delta Doctor role at the moment. There's also a hacker version with a combi rifle and a light riot stopper. So this potentially ticks 3 boxes for me because he can do the hacking programs of Carbonite and Spotlight. Because he's a hacker, he can also generally push buttons and do things in missions, and he comes with that light riot stopper. So it's kind of costly, but as a jack of all trades, this one's pretty good because again, you could drop this with a line of sight blocking building between you and the thing you want to hack, and you could potentially get off Carbonite or something pretty useful and then wander off and go for an objective. So it's very situational, and you've got to have your head about you to use this one properly and not just get it shot off the table. But the hacker is actually probably my second favorite after the Specialist Operative one. Then there's the Spitfire Delta, which is the most expensive profile I think you can get for the Delta. The Spitfire is best between 8 inches and 24. It's damage 14, so pretty good. Burst 4, so good, really good. It's costly at 1.5 SWC and 2.5 points, but that's because the Spitfire can tear through most things. So, I mean, imagine you're basically dropping something that's burst 4 high damage almost anywhere you like. So that's not good for your opponent. So that's why it costs so much. Then there's the Yud Doctor Delta, which is using the Yud bot. It comes with the boarding shotgun and the peripheral Yud bot. So peripherals, they don't have to stay within a certain range of your the controller. So in this case, it's the Delta. So the Yud bot would potentially drop in from the sky with the Doctor, and then you could send the peripheral off to heal something while the Doctor goes off and heals someone else, potentially. So situationally can be potentially really good. Yud bots currently available in the Aleph Steel Phalanx Dactyl support pack and also the Aleph support pack. So you can get that model if you are going to be running the Yudbot Doctor Delta. The Yudbot gets Mimetism -3 and also has a para CC weapon. So once it's healed something, you could always throw it at a big chunky target and try and get that paralysis CC attack off if you're lucky. The Yudbot's got a 6-4 move, so it could be good for running into a hotspot where the Delta's too valuable to use. So you know, this is expensive as an option, and technically obviously you're using a peripheral, so it's a little bit more complicated, but is a really good option for us actually. These guys are good for missions like Firefight. Consider taking the Specialist Operative or the Hacker for that one. Epsilon, SWC at 1.5 costs 2.5, medium infantry. These guys are the James Bond of O12. So they're just as at home in the corridors of the Oberhaus Concilium as they are deep in the jungle taking out a high value target. They're extremely versatile. I rarely have a list without one, and their presence alone is often a threat. So, I love the Epsilon. Comes with Mimetism -3 and MSV2. So MSV2 means that any mimetism is cancelled out, regardless of how high it is. Yeah, just let that sink in. That's pretty cool, especially if you're going up against a high mimetism list, like Combined Army or something like that. You can only take 2 in a list, and you've got 2 profiles to choose from, either the HMG or the multi-sniper. The HMG we've covered with the Kappa, but as a recap, it's damage 15 and burst 4, and is designed for 16 inches to 32 inches to be its optimal range. Then the multi-sniper has 2 profiles, burst and anti-material. Both multi-sniper profiles are good between 16 inches and 48, so a lot of the board, and a damage 15. Burst is B2 using AP ammo, and we've covered that a fair bit, so you're halving the arm. Anti-material is burst 1 and double action, which means 2 saves for every successful hit. I will probably be running the HMG to start with, as the burst 4 can be very useful against something with lots of mimetism, but have to be mindful of that shorter range. So, yeah. Love an Epsilon, again, also pretty much an auto-include for me. Beta Troopers, Remote Activity Unit Beta, so that's an SWC cost of between 0 and 1.5 depending on the profile, and will cost you between 3 and 4 points, which is definitely on the more expensive end of the scale. And they occupy the heavy infantry slot, so we're getting into some chunky boys now. All heavy infantry models can be hacked, but you'll also see that they have the hackable icon, but just bear that in mind, don't wander them too close to other hackers. They're on the higher side of points, but there's a good reason why Beta Troopers are. Their 6th move means that they're rocketing up the board. That's really good. And Mimetism -3 means they're also pretty hard to hit. They get Dodge +3, which means that for a robot, they can actually dodge their way out of trouble pretty well. They've got Climbing Plus, which means they can scale any wall of a building with a short skill instead of a long skill. So long as it's shorter than 6 inches, obviously, they can get up there and get onto a rooftop. You've got AVA 3, so you could take 3 of them if you wanted, but because of the points cost, you might not end up taking more than 1. They're Structure 2, which means effectively they've got 2 wounds, so that's pretty hardy, but because it's Structure, they would need an engineer to repair them. So you've got 4 profiles to choose from. You've got Hacker with SMG and Nanopulsar. This one could be fun, as it's quite possible to get this model within 8 inches of an enemy you want to hack quite quickly. So obviously hacking works in that they've got to be within 8 inches of you, and then you can hack them. You don't need line of sight though. The Nanopulsar gets +1 to burst, which is good. Yes, the hacking profile's already covered. Both Carbonite and Spotlight could be useful in the right situation. So how I'd see playing the Beta Trooper Hacker is that because it's fairly resilient, it's got mimetism, is you could fairly easily run it up the board to get near something that you wouldn't want to spotlight or target. Spotlight to target or immobilize, and do that pretty well. But I think there are other uses for a hack. There are other profiles that would suit my playstyle for hackers, so I might not take the Beta Trooper as a hacker. The Doctor Beta Trooper is a potentially good option. That comes with a boarding shotgun. Climbing could be really useful for getting to like a stranded or unconscious Epsilon that's stuck on a rooftop. Obviously the fact that this thing can climb pretty easily would be very handy. So possibly as a Doctor, but maybe. Then there's a Special Operative with multi-rifle. The multi-rifle's obviously got 2 profiles, both are damage 13, and they work fairly well up close. This is the profile I'd likely choose for something like supplies mission, and anything where a heavily guarded button might need pushing, because this one might be fairly durable at -3, but again, I'm probably going to use different profiles if that's the situation. And then the Spitfire. So the Spitfire profile is obviously quite expensive, but it's great for walking into the thick of it and shooting everything in sight. Beta Trooper is an odd one for me. I really want to include one in my list, but I don't know how to do it properly yet. So I'll probably experiment with a couple of different profiles, and this will be the model that I try to make work. It is versatile, but it's also pretty costly. So it might be worth taking into some missions, but have an experiment with this because it might work for you better than I can see it working, and drop in the comments how you might use the Beta Trooper. Then there's the Gamma. SWC 1.5, so relatively costly, and costs 5 points. I think it's the most expensive model we've got in O12, and it's heavy infantry. It is hackable, so don't let it wander too close to enemy hackers. The 6-2 move is actually quite mobile for a big guy. You're mostly only going to be using that first movement profile, so the fact that it can move 6 inches is really good. Its armor 6 and BTS 6 means it needs some serious firepower to take it down. It's also got 2 wounds, so even if a couple of shots go through, it should survive. It's an S5, so it's a big model, and it's AVA 2, so you've got limited models. I can't really see a lot of people taking 2 of these, because that would then be a third of your points limit, but 1 is pretty much an auto-include for me. The BS-14 is good and high. This guy is good at shooting and taking a hit. Like, you need to use this. This is a sledgehammer of a unit for you. Almost an auto-include, especially in scenarios like quadrant control, where you need to protect an area and kill anything that comes close. 4 profiles with an LT option, which is good. So as a lieutenant, yeah, I'll come to that in a second, but the HMG has already been covered. The gun, I like it. I like it a lot for laying down a lot of heavy shots. And then the Fauerbach, which is the other option, is best between 16 inches and 32, but it's more forgiving either side. If you slightly misjudge the ranges, you don't get so severely penalized. And you've also got the heavy pistol if things come in really close, and that heavy pistol is actually pretty good as far as pistols and secondary weapons go. The Fallback is damage 14, so not as hard hitting as the HMG. It's burst 2, but it has AP and DA, so armor piercing and double action. So not only does a successful hit mean 2 armor saves, but each of those saves will be halved, will have the armor value halved of your opponent. So that's good. I still would rather have the higher damage and the higher volume of shots from the HMG. So I think the HMG is going to be the main profile that I end up using for the Gamma. You get an LT version of both of those. There are going to be several occasions where you want your lieutenant to be able to take a beating. So I think it's Firefight, where your lieutenant is open information, so you know who it is, and you get bonus points for killing your opponent's lieutenant. I would go for a Gamma or an Omega lieutenant for this, because it can take a hit. Pair this with a LAMBDA Doctor, for example, just sitting behind it, you know, out of blast range, so it doesn't get hit by, you know, explosive ammo or anything like that, and then potentially move that up and repair the Gamma if it's taking big hits. So I like the Gamma. It's an auto-include for me, and it's going to be a lieutenant a lot of times, but it's going to be situational to the mission. And also don't forget, the lieutenant gets its special little extra order. How useful would it be for you to be able to spend a regular order on the Gamma to shoot something, and then have a free order on top of that to then move and shoot something else? So lots of advantages to have that. Then there's the Omega, which is SWC 0 to 1.5 and costing 4 to 4.5 depending on the profile. Heavy infantry. This is a really good unit. Like the Gamma, it's pretty much an auto-include for me. It's got mimetism -6, which makes it really hard for it to hit. It's got 2 wounds, so it is quite survivable if something goes through the armor 4, which is good to have in a pinch alongside the mimetism -6. AVA 3, so you could take a few, but at this cost I don't think you'll see more than 1 on the table. And you've got 4 profiles to choose from. There's multi-rifle, which we've covered a lot, but it comes with a heavy riot stopper, which is obviously very similar to the light riot stopper, which we've already covered with the Delta, but it's the bigger template, so that's good. It's great for taking on a big unit like a Gamma or an Omega. Don't forget templates auto hit too, so if you're going up against something with -6 mimetism, basically in an O12 versus O12, I'd be sending my Omega against another Omega and a Gamma, just to try and take it down. It's good against something with high armor, high BTS, lots of wounds. So you want to choose the right matchup for this. Don't waste this on small targets, but send it towards something that's really niggly to remove from the table. You do get a lieutenant version of this profile, which could be a good option if you're not going to be taking the Gamma, or depending on how aggressively you run your Omega. So again, if you want your Omega to have the extra order that the lieutenant role gives it, because it's going to be going tag hunting or it's going after big units or something like that, then possibly do it as your lieutenant. It can also press buttons and things like that, but it might die. So it depends on your playstyle as to whether you go with a Gamma and sit it back and just keep it, or if you go for an Omega. There is a special operative version of the above, which is a solid option, potentially alongside something like a BETATROOPER for really difficult to get to button pushers. I have run the Omega the entire length of the board before to go for a console that was deep in the enemy deployment zone, and it actually did a pretty good job of surviving. So just bear that in mind, it's actually pretty survivable. You've got to watch out for any MSV2 on the table, because that mimetism -6 is going to vanish if you come across any MSV2. So again, if you're playing O12 versus O12, watch out for your Epsilons. Can be difficult to stop if on a rampage, so this is a good one to just throw up the board even though it's expensive. It's also pretty durable. COPPERBOTS, that's definitely pronounced wrong, but that's the best I can do, sorry for that. SWC 0 costs half a point, and it's a remote, so the REM role. These guys can be hacked pretty easily. There's no model yet, but we have been teased an O12 peeler COPPERBOTS, which would be perfect for this sort of role. So if you are going to be running any of these COPPERBOTS that I'm about to go through, just watch out for the O12 peeler to drop. You could use the LF rebots as well. These are lovely because they've got a 6/6 movement, so they could motor up the board. They've got this one's got no BS because it only comes with a CC weapon and has mimetism -3. I'd probably choose this if I only had 0.5 points left and a spare slot, and I was basically just wanting a model to come in so that I could get the order for my order pool, but not really use it heavily. The Millicent COPPERBOTS, SWC 1.5 costs 1.5, and it's another remote, so again, remember that it's hackable. It's got a 6/4 move, so not quite as mobile as the COPPERBOT. It's got a 12 BS, which is as good as a Kappa. AVA 2. So yeah, so you could take 2 if you wanted, but there's only one profile available, which is the missile launcher. I have covered the missile launcher before, but this would be a relatively cheap way to get one on the board. It does cost the same as the Kappa with missile launcher, but obviously the Kappa's only got a 4/4 move, and the BS is the same. So if I'm not taking a Kappa missile launcher, I'm probably taking a Millicent COPPERBOT missile launcher, because that 6 inches of move will enable me to start deployed hidden behind a building, and then hopefully get within line of sight of something that I want to explode. So that is worth factoring in. I would probably end up choosing the Millicent COPPERBOT over a Kappa missile launcher, actually. The OCO COPPERBOTS, or the OCO COPPERBOTS, SWC0 costs 1 point and is another remote, so it is again hackable. This has the special operative keyword and a 6/4 move, comes with a combi rifle and para CC. Oh, this could be really good. Well, not really good, but this could be a good option. It only costs you 1 point, no SWC, so it's not doing much in terms of depleting your points for bigger units, but it could be a really cheap button pusher for some missions. That 6-inch move is going to help it get towards most objectives, and obviously the combi rifle is actually a pretty good weapon, so don't rule them out for giving you an expendable quick objective grabber option. Might run one of these, but I'm not quite sure yet, because I think I'm going to go heavier in terms of using something like the Omega as my button pusher. Peeler COPPERBOTS, SWC1 costs 2. This one, again, as mentioned already, we've been teased an O12 Peeler COPPERBOT model. It might come out in the next year or so keep your eye out for that. Again, 6/4 movement, so really good option. This has got a couple of cool tricks up its sleeve actually. So 360 visor means that it acts as though it's got 360-degree line of fire even in its reactive turn. So whereas obviously most people have the 180-degree line of fire and you've got to be really careful about where you position it, not so with this guy. It acts as though it's got 360, which is fantastic. If you position it well, you can actually watch out for drop troopers who might drop in behind a very valuable unit. This guy can then shoot quite nicely. It's also got total reaction, which means that this unit can use their full burst in ARO instead of just the standard ARO burst 1, which means the HMG is disgusting in this situation. So long as you get the ranges right, because obviously the HMG doesn't do so as well in close combat, it's not close combat but close ranges, you'll be doing full burst 4 with 15 damage in ARO. Now remember, this can't be split fired, so you do have to fire all of this into one target, but with 360-degree visor, total reaction, an HMG, I am going to be running one of these as a defensive piece once the model is out. I'm going to be giving this a solid run. I'm probably going to be sitting it either on top of a building, knowing that's probably going to get shot as a priority, but at only 2 points, I don't mind if it's sucking up orders to be removed. Or I'm going to have it in cover behind my defensive backline, watching the back of something important like the EPSILON or the Gamma, so that if something comes in behind it to try and remove them, then the Peeler COPPERBOT can deal with that quite nicely. UDBOT. SWC0 costs 0.5, is remote. There are LF models available if you want one in your army. I think it comes in a support pack. It's got mimetism -3. I've covered a lot of the profile when we went through the UDBOT Dr. Delta. The thing to remember with UDBOTs is that you won't really be taking them on their own. But if a model has the Doctor or the Engineer keyword, then they can take up to 2 UDBOTs as peripherals to send off to basically go fix stuff. The Delta is the exception to this, so if you notice his UDBOT is a UDBOT B, these are UDBOTs. So the reason why it's a UDBOT B is because it airdrops in with him, and so you can't actually add any more UDBOTs to him because UDBOTs don't have the B special thingy, so they're technically different UDBOTs. So these UDBOTs that we see here in the profile, you would basically add 1 or 2 of them to a Doctor or an Engineer, and here are the profiles for them. So yep, you wouldn't take them on their own, I really don't think. Please correct me if I'm wrong with that, but basically you would just add them to a Doctor or an Engineer to help fix things. Gangbuster with the Special Crime Squad. SWC0 costs you 2 points. They fill the skirmisher role. These guys, in their backstory, they infiltrate criminal organizations as undercover operatives, as hitmen, mobsters, and then they destroy these organizations from the inside.
They've got MSV1, so don't forget that reduces all mimetism profiles by 3, and they've themselves got mimetism -3, so that's pretty handy. Infiltration means that they can deploy anywhere on your half of the table, which is good. One profile option with the boarding shotgun, which is probably all you would actually need. This is really handy in missions like Quadrant Control or anything where having a unit midway up the table from the start with the vision to counter sneaky troops is actually pretty good. I think Gangbusters are going to be a few missions, as I like to have a bit of board control up to the halfway mark. So having 1 or 2 of these, bear in mind they're only 2 points, might be a good way for me to dominate and at least control that midway mark and make it so that someone's got to contest. Razor. SWC 0 to 0.5 costs 3 to 3.5. Skirmisher roll, but pretty expensive unit. There's no model available yet. It's similar to the LYNX in that it's a sneaky surprise attack and camo god in certain ways. Also has infiltration like the Gangbuster, so it can start midway as a camo token. That could be tricksy. Mimetism -6 makes it really hard to kill, even when out of camo, and obviously makes it really difficult to get out of camo. It's got 4 profiles and an AVA of 2. All come with mines, so this could be better than the LYNX, because whereas the LYNX doesn't have infiltration, so has to start in your deployment zone, this guy could basically start laying mines at almost the halfway mark of the table from the first turn. So this guy might be a very powerful unit for most O12 lists. It's probably worth taking the Special Operatives version in most scenarios, so that you can lay a few mines and then you can potentially get close to an objective in camo and sneak up to it rather than using something like an Omega to bum rush it and take all the hits. The Hacker is a potential option, but I think there's cheaper hackers out there if I'm going to use it. However, having a Hacko as a camo token is good because it's going to be easier for it to get into a position where it can potentially carbonite or spotlight a target without getting shot off the table. It's basically got 2 weapon loadouts to choose from, either combi rifle and AP mines or boarding shotgun and AP mines. If you choose either the Hacker or the Specialist Operative, that decision's going to be made for you. So yeah, not huge amounts of choice, it depends on the role you want it to play in your list. Hippolyta, Amazon Officer. SWC 0 costs 3, she's the Warband. She is a close combat beast with CC 23. She's basically amazing at running up the battlefield, dodging bullets, then ploughing into the enemy. If you like approaching a firefight with the subtlety of a Kardashian reunion, then this is your trooper. She's got Martial Arts level 4, which is the same as QUERVO, Mimetism -6, dodge +2 inches, so she dodges 4 inches even in ARO, and she has Super Jump. So Super Jump turns a jump from a long skill to a short skill in any direction, and it means that you get to then use your second short skill. So you could jump your 4 inches and then shoot and attack, whereas other people are having to jump using their entire order. By using your full order to jump, you use both your movement attributes. So that would be 8 inches for this girl, which could mean that you are at the top of a very tall building very quickly. But you do get no partial cover during the jump, which is handy because she's got Mimetism -6. So yes, getting the extra -3 for partial cover would be handy, but it's not the end of the world. So having -6 when she's out in the open is a really good thing. She's got a bunch of good weapons. The Breaker Combi Rifle is awesome, the Nanopulsar is good, and the DACC weapon, which works like the double action ammo. So that's pretty good. So Breaker Combi is great up to 16 inches with BS3 and damage 13. So again, great if you can jump onto the rooftop of a building and then shoot something pretty close. The target has to use their BTS save instead of their arm, and it also uses AP ammo, so that halves their BTS save. So this is again a good option. You've got to choose your matchup with Hippo, but she is pretty cool. I would probably use her as a distraction kind of effect, so run her up the board, taking a whole bunch of shots, probably dodging a lot of the stuff early, just to get in the enemy's face so that they're then forced to deal with her as a priority. It's a quick way of making someone's strategy go out the window because you're making them deal with something pretty soon. Then there's Liang Kai, I think that's pronounced correctly. He's the Wandering Shaolin Monk. He is an SWC cost of 0, and his points cost is 1.5 to 2 depending on which version you take, and he's the Warband like Hippo. He's a new model with CodeOne. He was actually launched as part of the Pano Yujing Operation Coldstrom as like a convention extra, but you can get him separately, I think. You can use him in O12 as well. He's basically a fallen warrior seeking redemption, so he'll align himself with the forces of good and try and make peace with himself. He's another CC beast with CC 23, so the same as Hippo. You can only have one in the list, which is pretty normal. He's a character. He's got martial arts level 4. He's got forward deployment plus 4 inches, so he can start outside of your deployment zone, which Hippo cannot. He's got dodge plus 1 inch, whereas Hippo's got plus dodge 2 inches, but he has dodge plus 3 to the roll, which Hippo doesn't have. So he's got mimetism -3, whereas Hippo's got -6. You can tell that I'm trying to compare the two of them because they actually fulfill very similar roles in a list. And he also has super jump. So there's a lot of similarities between the two profiles, Hippolyta and Leon Kai. He's got 2 profiles, a chain rifle and a light shotgun, and a chain rifle and a combi rifle, which is 1 weapon, by the way, so there's a chain rifle and a combi rifle. Chain rifle is good and uses a large teardrop template, so auto hits, and would probably take the combi rifle version if I was going to run this guy, just because it gives it options. He's cheaper than Hippo for similar attributes, so this is where I'm kind of torn between the two. I'd choose Liang Kai over Hippo if I needed the points, but Hippo's mimetism -6 suits my playstyle quite a lot because I don't think a lot about cover and model placement very well. So at least having the -6 means that I can leave her out in the open and she'll do fine. So those are my main considerations. I also don't have the Liang Kai model and I probably won't get it, and I do already have Hippo, so that is also steering me in that direction. Alrighty, so that is a summary of O12's models, unit profiles, how you'd potentially use them in certain situations, and some considerations in terms of your list building. I am going to step away from the temptation of giving you a recommended list to run, because how you play Infinity is that you and your opponent would choose a mission first, then you choose the points, and then you build your list. And you do want to heavily tailor your list to the mission. So read the mission, read the type of models that get special bonuses and all that sort of stuff, and then includes those as your core units, and then build support units around them. So it depends on the situation, as I've kind of mentioned, just to steer you in some direction. For something like Firefight, I'm probably going to go heavy Delta, QUERVO, Crusher, because they can deploy anywhere pretty much, and that will be handy for hunting lieutenants and doing all that sort of stuff. I'll probably take a Gamma as my lieutenant or an Omega as my lieutenant, so that if he gets hunted down, at least there's some survivability. With a Peeler, COPPERBOTS, Total Reaction to try and add additional protection to my lieutenant. That's just off the top of my head. I haven't run this in terms of points to see how well this works out. In other ones like Quadrant Control, probably BETATROOPER, Omega, Special Operative, and yeah, Epsilon always gets included. Gamma will probably get included in Quadrant Control as well. And then I might go for some camo tokens to try and get into the opponent's half and mess some stuff up. So probably the Razor. Now these are just options. Now again, my playstyle is very different to most other people's. Again, you might decide that you do just want to run an entire Kappa list and see how that works. Good for you if you do that. Please in the comments tell me how that goes if you do it. I would love to see how that goes. I think it could work out well actually. I might even give it a go one day. But yeah, I'm also on Instagram if you want to follow me there. That's more painting, miniature painting, that's battles as they're happening and some behind the scenes stuff. So feel free to give me a follow there. Thank you all for your support. I really do appreciate the comments, the likes, and everything that goes on in this channel. It's a really nice place for me to come because it's filled with positivity and cool people who lend their opinions and their expertise. So thank you all for contributing. Feel free to give me a subscribe and look forward to some future videos.